her preferred surefire battle style, using the power of death to steal her foe's life force, then the power of life to convert it into energy for her. Fighting like this cancelled out any slight strength differences, and the longer the battle went on, the more of an advantage she enjoyed. When it came to draining the energy of foes who far outclassed her, she was an expert. Dagrel, too, was glad to see Luminous in this state. He had a healthy respect for his foes. They were wonderful people, no matter how he looked at them. They were so reliable as allies, and now that they were enemies, they made Dagrel's heart soar like nothing else. Truly a shame to kill them. But he had to avenge the man who had been his best friend. Only then could Dagrel fulfill his destiny as a god-killer. This was the secret agreement he'd made with Feldway through Fen. Dagrel would cooperate with Feldway's ambition to revive Veldenava. After that, the real battle would begin. And this secret agreement with Feldway wasn't the only one, either. If they defeated Luminous, all the western lands would be incorporated into the domain of the giants. If they then invaded and overran the forest of Jura, that land would also belong to Dagrel. It was his chance to both go on a rampage to fulfill his destiny and satisfy his territorial ambitions. I can't stop here, he thought, and by that point, his instincts were already starting to run wild. So Dagrel decided there was no need to continue this charade any longer. In the first place, Dagrel began to speak. But at that moment, everything stopped. All hostilities no longer meant anything. You can't do very much now, can you? Only his muttering echoed across the world before fading. In the world where only her conscience remained, Luminous was puzzled. Oh, you're conscious? No wonder he boasted about you being his greatest masterpiece. Dagrel's voice had a tone of admiration, but Luminous was struck by a fear that chilled her soul. As wise as she was, she might have overlooked this entirely without being aware of it, but since she was concentrating on the battle, she understood what was going on. As much as she didn't want to. Time is standing still? It was pure despair. From the very beginning, there was no way we could beat Dagrel. She fully understood this, but Luminous's thirst to live still wasn't lost. She was gathering information, figuring out how to survive, and it only led to further despair. Luminous continued to claw her way back, even though it felt like she was being swallowed by a deep, bottomless darkness. In this suspended world, even despair went on forever. She closed her eyes, confronting her regrets. At the very least, I wanted to take on that hateful, irreverent, evil dragon with my own two hands. And just as Luminous was thinking that, she heard what sounded like a high-pitched laugh. It rang out just as Dagrel's fist was about to reach her. Her thoughts paused there. Qua ha 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 ha. It is I. The moment she perceived what this voice meant, Luminous fully grasped what was going on. A mighty fist loomed in front of her, and a brown palm was there to catch it. The evil dragon, who had been nowhere near the battlefield until that moment, stopped Dagrel's fist before it could hit her. Time moves with the arrival of hope, so there may be no eternal nights. At that very moment, the evil dragon that jumped through time and space, the invincible Veldora that Luminous hated but so longed for, blocked the attack by Dagrel, who had been hiding an impossibly huge amount of power from them. The time for despair had come to an end. Chapter 4. Battle of the Divine Tree. Turning back the clock from Veldora's arrival, I set up a spatial transport over to the former Eurasania to stop Milim's rampage. The area where Velzad's ice and snow were blowing was too hard to see in for me to head there directly. Anticipating this, I set myself down some distance away. From there, I made a beeline for the site, following the signs. Milim and Velzad were supposed to be clashing with each other, so I approached with caution. But it wasn't quite what I was imagining. In fact, it was worse. TCH. You came sooner than I thought. But it's too late. Milim. Use your power to shatter the sacred tree in our way. Milim and Velzad weren't the only ones there. Feldway had joined them, but in fact, he felt so different I wasn't sure it really was Feldway. He just had this overwhelming presence, way past what Michael had. I wasn't sure if I could win in a serious fight any longer. For some reason, he was giving orders to Milim like he was her boss. Milim, I saw, had undergone some pretty loony changes. It was too indistinct in the video feed, but up close, she was beyond ominous. On her back was a pair of jet black wings. A single red horn had sprouted from her forehead, shining a rainbow of colors in the light. The rest of her skin, except for her face, was covered with hard, shining dragon scales that sported mysterious patterns and dull, shifting colors. I wondered if this was the berserk form of Milim, and at the same time, I sensed a power from her that almost made me tremble. Milim, the demon lord who had become an incarnation of absolute destruction, was truly worthy of being called the Destroyer. But why was she being ordered around? What in the world was going on? This is due to Regalia Dominion, part of the ultimate skill Michael, Lord of Justice. It seems Feldway has succeeded in controlling Milim. Huh? Wait a minute. So we got Milim running amok and being this total menace, and Feldway's using her as a pawn? That's, beyond awful. Fortunately, it doesn't feel like he is in complete control. Even with Feldway devoting his full computational domain skill to controlling Milim, it seems he can only issue simple commands. No, that's still bad enough. The only real luck I had so far was that he didn't order her to kill me. Feldway sure didn't look happy to see us, but he had no intention of fighting. He didn't care about us at all, in fact. He just gave the order to Milim and left. His rule over Milim was likely too unstable for him to focus on anything else. Or perhaps he wanted to prioritize the destruction of the sacred tree. Was it impossible for Feldway's enthralling power to revoke an order once it had been given, then? It sounded quite feasible. Just thinking about Milim seriously trying to kill me gave me the shivers. I should be glad it didn't come to that, but I never thought it would come to this, either. It was completely unexpected. Being in this runaway state, she must have lost her ability to resist him. I knew Feldway also had this kind of controlling skill, but I didn't even consider the possibility he'd use it on Milim. I couldn't blame Seal alone for overlooking that. I mean, I was sure Milim had all kinds of resistances against this hypnosis. She told me all the time that stuff didn't work on her. If she hadn't been in this berserk state, I doubt Feldway ever would have succeeded. And that was exactly what he was aiming for, wasn't he? If they made Milim go berserk, the world would be in danger of ending. But they then removed that concern via Regalia Dominion. It was quite a risky gamble. Seals being so vague about this, I suppose the strategy had little chance of success. Frankly, it would have been crazy to go through with it. But if that was the case, there was no point in worrying about the why of it. What about the sacred tree Feldway set as Milim's goal? This is a divine tree that protects the capital of the sorceress dynasty of Thalion. It is a tree so large it can hold a giant city. It also seems to play the role of stabilizing the magicules in this world, preventing natural disasters. Seal answered me clearly and concisely. It was as knowledgeable and dependable as ever, but what it had just told me couldn't be overlooked. I'd never been to Thalion, but its capital was in a tree. Neat, but that wasn't the point. I only had a vague image of it, but if the capital was built atop a tree, it'd be a disaster if the tree was destroyed, right? We had no choice but to stop it. And if we couldn't, well, we'd have to buy enough time to evacuate the residents or else a catastrophe was sure to ensue. Whoa, this is sure a pain in the ass, huh? Guy was talking like this was someone else's problem. I really wished he could contribute a little more. We weren't talking about writing an essay for class or whatever. What, you got a problem with me? He snapped. No, sir. I'm sorry, sir. I wanted to complain that I didn't need him reading my aura like that, but better to avoid ruffling any more feathers. I kept my mouth shut because I needed him to do his best for me there. But Guy didn't sound too grateful about that. That bastard Feldway, he grumbled. He's just as treacherous as ever. Oh? I mean, well, Letting you talk me into joining you turned out to be the correct answer, you know. That made sense to me. If Guy had been too busy looking out for an attack from Ivalij to come, all might have been lost right there and then. Guy was going to handle Velzard while I tackled Milim, but if it were just me, well. But who cares about hypotheticals? No time to loiter around any longer. Milim had started to move. Guy naturally stepped in front of Velzard. As he did, I tried to inform Ellie before pursuing Milim, but for some reason, I couldn't get through on my cell phone. I guessed she was busy, which wasn't a good sign, so with no other choice, I followed Milim while contacting Benimaru. While connecting my thought communication to Benimaru, I desperately tried to catch up and attack Milim to get her attention. But she just shrugged me off. I wasn't trying to go all out on her, but I thought that was still a pretty powerful attack. No time to whine. Milim had just let out a roar, setting off this weird kind of power. I'm guessing the vibrations of her scream broke all the molecular bonds in the target's body or something. I managed to escape it, but the shockwave alone made a river below us dry out. I thought it was too risky to mess with Milim. But if things continued as they were, the collapse of Thalion was imminent. As I wondered what the hell I was going to do about this, I felt my thought communication link up with Benimaru. The probability of success is low, but I have come up with a plan. There was no more time to hesitate. I was flying a few dozen times the speed of sound, and we were very close to reaching Thalion. No matter how low the chance of success was, I had no choice but to bet everything on Seal. It was the same thing I always did, really, but so be it. Despite my qualms, I informed Benimaru of the situation and ordered him to carry out the plan Seal had described to me. The sorceress dynasty of Thalion was facing an unprecedented crisis. In the midst of this, the celestial Emperor Elmesia spoke to her mother Sylvia in her usual easygoing, informal tone of voice. So is Rimuru coming, you think? Forget it. The demon Lord Milim's gone out of control, and he's busy trying to stop her. Oh, no way. This was even worse than she'd assumed. Elmesia couldn't hide her surprise. Also, the cause of it was apparently Velzard the Ice Dragon. Even the demon Lord Guy's been convinced to take action. She made it sound easy, but it'd take someone like Rimuru to get Guy to do anything. Elmesia, fully aware of that, just wrote it off as typical Rimuru behavior. Still, this was a conundrum. The capital of Thalion, the city embraced by the sacred tree, had turned into a hellish landscape, thanks to the onslaught of Jahil. He was joined by another man who called himself Zerario of the Three Stellar Leaders, and that guy was wreaking havoc on the scene, too. We cranked up the sacred tree's defense mechanism to its limit, but even then, it's not going to matter much at this point. Elmesia's head was spinning. The Magus was fully mobilizing to deal with the situation, but its members were being shot down one after another. Elmesia was impressed that they hadn't been wholly pulverized yet. The Magus, one of Thalion's proudest corps, was a group of high-ranking military officers also known as the Pureblood Knights. They had the authority to act in place of the Heavenly Emperor and serve as mediators for any relevant disputes. Reportedly the greatest military force in Thalion, it was composed only of those whose blood harkened back to the ancients, or so the story went. In reality, its knights were picked based on their compatibility with a weapon known as the Magic Mount. This item, also called a Magus, was a closely guarded state secret. It had the same name as the core itself as part of an effort to prevent information leaks. A Magus was about 16 feet tall, with its exterior made of magisteel, and it was driven by dragon muscle fibers. It was an intelligent weapon with its own will that searched for a partner to utilize it. Its true nature was shown only in operation, and just like an elementalist's most secret moves involved merging with an elemental, a magical mount was also designed to release its power only when piloted by its user. Usually, it was stored in a space within a magical jewel placed in a necklace or bracelet. Cabal and Guido both had one, by the way. When they confronted the Berserker Fleet after meeting Rimuru for the first time, they were this close to activating their Maguses, but launching them in a foreign country would lead to charges of leaking confidential information and get Archduke Errold in serious trouble to boot. Besides, they didn't even know if a magus was enough to beat Ifrit. In the end, they stuck to melee combat, reasoning that the main job was to protect Ellen long enough to get her to safety. Both Cabal and Guido had A-rank strength, and riding in on a magus wouldn't have doubled their fighting power or anything. They were already strong enough, which was one reason Errold had chosen them as Ellen's guards. That was how magic mounts worked. Every partnership was different. Some, like Cabal and Guido, didn't see that much of an upgrade from them, while others were total wimps who transformed into overpowered war machines on their maguses. These devices provided over A combat strength, and Thalion usually sent squads of 300 to deal with enemies. "I didn't know we had that many maguses," said Sylvia. "Yes," Elmesia replied, "we've been beavering away at them." The 13 noble families of Thalion usually quarreled with each other day and night. During this crisis, though, they seemed to have come to an agreement of sorts, devoting everything they could to this battle regardless of the expense. If they chose this moment to rebel, Elmesia would seriously consider abandoning them, since she no longer saw any point in keeping them alive. The fact that this didn't happen was something of a silver lining. Regardless, the conversation between Elmesia and Sylvia continued. "You know," Elmesia began, "they were developing golems over in Rimuru City, too. I think we're going to lose our advantage in a flash. If that happens, we were going to propose a joint development, weren't we?" "Pretty much. Rimuru's got a lot of common sense. I think he agrees with me that we don't want any superweapons getting leaked out. We could place numerical limits on what we provide." Elmesia was usually so secretive, but this was a surprisingly unguarded measure from her. It surprised the top officials who had been listening in, but this was just Elmesia and Sylvia's way of escaping reality. And now, another magus ace had been shot down. The EP of these knights were estimated to be over 500,000 each, but even an ace-class knight like that couldn't stall for time against Jahil, and he wasn't even the only notable leader among the enemy. Zorario went without saying. Darlis and Nice, who were under his command, had also achieved remarkable results. They had taken on physical forms as walking dead, destroying the magus with tremendous force. "All that damage," complained Elmesia. "A great loss, isn't it?" But she didn't really mean it. The survival of the nation was more important than things money could replace. They had to hold out until reinforcements arrived, and that'd be difficult if things continued as they were. Such calculations put her in the mood to complain even more. "I guess we'll just have to make do," Sylvia resignedly said. Sylvia and Elmesia, mother and daughter, were the most powerful fighters in all of Thalion. They were standing by right then because they had been called back by the elders and other important government figures. "Your Majesty, you must not. And Lady Sylvia, please have a little more prudence." "Indeed. If we had a chance of winning, that would be one thing, but this is just too much. I'm afraid I cannot allow it." Even the Grand Elders came out to block them. They were, of course, concerned for their well-being. Few of them knew Sylvia acted as a stand-in for Elmesia at times, even the 13 noble families didn't know it. Seeing them both at the same time created great confusion. Even so, their strength by themselves couldn't hold a candle to a magus knight on a magic mount, so order was restored among the royalty for the time being. Everyone in the magus corps was deployed, doing their best to buy time so Sylvia, Elmesia, and the other VIPs could escape. If the two of them returned to the battlefield, all the warriors' efforts would have been in vain. "But, to tell you the truth, I don't like the idea of us running away alone too much," Sylvia said. "I agree with you, Mom. I'm afraid Rimuru will make fun of me for it later. Maybe I should contribute a little." The two of them had already made up their minds. "Your Majesty." One of the elders was desperately shouting. It was the minister who had sent Laplace, or Thalion, off to the battlefield all those years ago. He had regretted that decision ever since, vowing never to repeat the same mistake, and now he was doing his best to protect his beloved Elmesia and her family. But Elmesia was in full politician mode. "Who am I?" she asked. As an elder, he had to answer. "You are Her Majesty the Emperor. Can anyone stand in my way? It's not fair, you know, exercising your power at a time like this." The elder was internally weeping. But he also understood this was how Elmesia lived, and there was nothing he could do to stop her, now that it had come to this. "That would never be possible, my liege." So he could do nothing but bow his head. This chief elder had given his approval, and there was nothing the others could do. The heads of the 13 noble families also had to fulfill their duties as leaders. As the grandest of the emperor's subjects, they were entrusted with leading the people according to her orders. "Your Majesty," Errol managed. "Ah, Errol," said Sylvia. "I'm sure Raimuru's got Ellen protected, so why don't you protect everyone else for us?" "Let me join you, Your Majesty." Nah, you just get in the way. I know you're one of the Magus captains, but you'd just be giving up your life for nothing." It was Sylvia, not Elmesia, turning him down. Errol thought this was their first meeting, but to Sylvia, he was her beloved husband's younger brother. They had met many times while she was pretending to be Elmesia. That was why she rejected him so coldly, and Ellis Grimwald, Elmesia's grandmother and Errol's mother, nodded in agreement. In her capacity as leader of the 13 noble families, she was now commanding Archduke Errol. "Hold back, Errol. And all the other leaders gathered here, please listen." Ellis's voice was full of dignity, despite her usually gentle demeanor. "Do not be selfish. You must heed the will of Her Majesty." She wasn't taking no for an answer. And no matter what the other kings in attendance thought, they could do nothing but nod back to her. But mother." Errol, still trying to argue, was silenced by Ellis's glare. It was the first time Errol had ever seen real anger on his mother's face. "If Lady Ellis hadn't stopped you," one of the kings admonished, "you would have been captured, you know." Then an old noble, one who had long since given up the throne to his sons, slapped Errol on the shoulder. "Don't give up, okay? Sylvia's been retired since that bastard Thalion disappeared. I get it if you don't know how scary she is, but trust me, she's even more of a handful than Her Majesty. Oh yes. All of us together couldn't match her. You'd best take her advice and flee to safety." It was an unwritten rule around there to never say Thalion was dead, a habit adopted because no one wanted to incur Sylvia's wrath. Everyone lamented their own helplessness. They were relying on her yet again, and would that make them the only survivors? But if this was the wish of the emperor, it was the duty of her subjects to obey. The young kings, looking at their elders, realized it was futile to try rebelling against it. At the same time, they were surprised to learn Thalion really was united together. Their parents and grandparents normally never got along, but there they were, amicably talking to each other. It was the first time they had ever seen such a thing, but it all seemed so natural they didn't feel it was insincere at all. Everyone there agreed, this was the charisma of Sylvia and Elmesia at work. Sylvia was a Vajra-wielding master who made full use of her ultimate skill Indra, Lord of Thunder. Her daughter, Elmesia El-Ru Thalion, had another face apart from her position as Emperor of the Sorceress dynasty. She had awakened the ultimate skill Vayu, King of Heavenly Wind, the apex of weather-based magic, a feat no doubt inspired by Sylvia's own skills. In battle, she too was a genius, freely wielding her god-class chakram to slice and dice her enemies. Her abilities were not as strong as Sylvia's, but they weren't far behind. Once again, the two of them had returned to the battlefield, everyone's hopes pushing them forward. It opened up a potential way out. It said God helps those who help themselves, but thanks to their courageous actions, the hopes of Thalion would continue unbroken into the future. Benimaru, Ci, Leon, Kagali, and Tyr arrived in Thalion sometime after Sylvia and Elmesia returned to the battlefield. The video feed in the control center showed them after their second sortie, and they were already looking exhausted. The injured seemed to be receiving medical treatment atop the leaves of the giant sacred tree. Sylvia and Elmesia were protecting them while dealing with Jahil and Zorario. The defense mechanism of the tree was functioning normally, and that was the only reason all of them were surviving. "Rimuru done it again," said an emotional Elmesia as she greeted Benimaru and the others. "I thought it'd be too late, but he really did send out reinforcements." "So Rimuru always keeps his promises," Benimaru replied with a smile as he looked at Zorario and Jahil. Leon flew in front of Zorario to replace Elmesia. The flame pillar sword radiated in Leon's hand, boasting of its presence. Ci, too, had crept up behind Zorario undetected. Everyone was in the air, floating around the sacred tree as they fought, and Ci had joined them like nothing was amiss about that. It was 2 against 1, although Leon and Ci were at a disadvantage in strength. But Ci, who never cared about fighting fair, readily took his foes by surprise without any hesitation. Jahil, on the other hand. "I'll never forgive you." Kagali spoke those words as she floated next to Sylvia. At the level they were at, they could create a foothold for themselves in the air just as well as on the ground. "Oh," thought Sylvia, "she's not subbing in for me?" But she still had some fight left in her, so she was thankful for the assistance, at least. Cheeky little. Jahil gritted his teeth as Tyr glared at him, as if challenging him to battle. It was about to be a 3-on-1 match. Benimaru grasped the battle situation from above. Except for Jahil and Zorario, the leaders, the Magus outclassed their enemies. With one stroke, they turned things around and began to push back the army of mystics. "If we can just defeat Jahil and the others, we'll win this." It wouldn't be easy, but Benimaru flashed a fearless smile as he watched on. Leon, facing Zorario, had a blank face as usual, but on the inside he was livid. He often found himself being misunderstood. He wasn't a good talker, and any good deed he did often wound up causing more resentment against him. The few people who really understood Leon were Sylvia, his mentor, and Elmesia, whom he considered a close ally, though the feeling wasn't mutual. Making those two suffer this much was a crime that ranked second in Leon's list of things that set him off. It went without saying, of course, that first place went to anyone who tried messing with Chloe, but there were other reasons for his anger this time. He couldn't forgive himself for letting these guys do what they wanted with him, and for the trouble he subsequently caused Sylvia. He wanted to take out Michael, the cause of all this, by his own hand, but Rimuru seemed to have gotten to Michael first. Now Leon owed him a debt he could never repay, which just made him feel worse. If he didn't make up for it, it'd be even harder to show his face around. The only person he wanted to owe anything to was Sylvia, but now he could see this was more than her problem alone. Velzad's purpose was unknown, but apparently she was on her way here, fighting Milim the whole time. If this place got caught in the fallout from that fight, it could easily be wiped off the map. And Leon didn't think that would even be the end of it. If one traveled north from Thalion, there were no obstacles to the Western nations, a hotbed of human civilization. To the west was the deadly desert, and beyond that was the holy void of Damargania. Turn a little to the southwest, and you'd reach El Dorado, Leon's domain. Nobody knew what Velzad was after, but there was no doubt in Leon's mind she'd target one of those places next. If it were only here, certain countermeasures could be taken, no matter her intentions. But with Milim also losing her mind, even trying to interfere with them was an impossible task. And were these just Velzad's intentions or Feldway's own plan, too? Whatever it is, we just have to stop it. That was Leon's creed. He preferred quick decisions like that, as well as punishment for anyone he suspected. In this case, whether Velzad and Milim could be stopped at all was largely up to Rimuru, but there was no doubt Thalion was an important defense line. That much was proven by the enemy choosing to attack it, an enemy who had to be eliminated before Milim and Velzad could reach it. Only then could they devote all their force to dealing with Milim's rage. It'd be suicide to fight them directly, but it should at least be possible to reduce the damage by making them change direction. Leon couldn't point them toward El Dorado by mistake, and threatening any human-run lands was out of the question. The barren lands would be the best destination for them. It wouldn't be great for Dagrel, but Leon thought it'd be the best thing to do. But to do that, he couldn't let himself get tied up with all of this. "Here," he said, taking advantage of Milim's rage. "Feldway comes up with the cleverest ideas." Leon thrust the tip of his sword at Zorario as he addressed him. He fought like a fencer, making him good at thrusts and other flashy techniques. Some people believed fencing was for dueling and not suitable for actual combat, but that wasn't true. The thrust, after all, was the most powerful of all sword techniques. Missing with it left you off balance and defenseless, making frequent use a great risk, but Leon's swordsmanship was good enough to overcome this weakness. Much like Sylvia and her spear skills, Leon's mix of technique and incredibly fast physical moves kept him from being exposed to attacks. In addition, Leon's skills were built around speed, and the flame pillar, his weapon, was god class. When he got serious, he didn't rely on his gold circle shield. Defense didn't matter to him with the speed and sword skills he had. He was the fastest out there, concentrating almost totally on his first-class swordsmanship, and that earned him the nickname the Light Flash Hero, once upon a time. Furthermore, Leon's ultimate skill Metatron, Lord of Purity, let him manipulate spiritual particles at will. Through that, he could invoke the all-powerful disintegration in rapid-fire succession, unstoppable by anyone. This was why they called Leon the strongest out there. In existence points, he wasn't far behind Zorario, but in combat ability. Leon's lean, flourish-free fighting style was more than enough to compete with Zorario. A true warrior knows a fellow true warrior, and Zorario couldn't kid himself about his opponent's skill. And so, they said they're after Veldora's draconic factors, but I don't even know what they're really thinking, said Zorario. Velzad is acting on her own, too. I wish someone would tell me what's going on with her. He gave Leon his honest, true thoughts. And in fact, Zorario had not been given any explanation at all. All he was doing was conducting a war to bring down Thalion, as ordered by Feldway. Jahil was thrown in there, too, although he was aiming for Luminous the whole time. If they're going that far, there must be some meaning behind trying to conquer this place. Nothing can be less inspiring than being forced to work without understanding the purpose of it. Zorario thought it an extremely unpleasant way to treat a general, let alone a soldier at the far end of the line, the proverbial cog in the machine. He was unable to resist Michael's rule over him, which was the only reason he put up with this. But Zorario was always looking for an opportunity, and he had a chance to disarm this thrall over him the moment Michael disappeared. Since then, he had been gradually analyzing this control over him, and now he was at the point where it'd be possible to shed it for good. But since he didn't see the need to spell all that out for Leon, Zorario changed the subject. So, Leon, are you going to duel with me? Or am I supposed to deal with that little sneak behind you at the same time? Zorario glanced at Benimaru as well, realizing he wasn't about to make a move. Benimaru wasn't looking down on Zorario as a fighter, he just wanted to make sure his assets were in the right places on the battlefield. That was largely the same as underestimating Zorario, but his foe wasn't inspired enough to do anything about that. He couldn't disobey an order, so he was just going through the motions. Ci knew his presence would be noticed. Unlike Jahil, Zorario seemed to be on his guard. As Benimaru saw it, Jahil was the bigger threat in EP alone, but Zorario was far more troublesome. Ci agreed, and that was why he was supporting Leon instead of trying to take Zorario by surprise. If you spotted me, then great, Ci said. We're cutting it pretty close here, too, so no, we will take any measure needed to win, Ci declared with pride that he was going to cheat. Leon had no objection. Losing would mess everything up, so it was natural to try to win by any means necessary. Thus the battle with Zorario began, with Leon taking the lead and Ci assisting. 3 people were fighting against Jahil, each with a very different method of attack. Sylvia was going at lightning speed, stabbing with her Vajra. Kagali was using long-range bolts as well, her ruined scepter working her power into a sharpened magical mass. Finally, Tyr was up front, keeping their foe in check, the most dangerous role, but she wasn't afraid of it. Anger dominated her body, she was trying to take Footman's place in this fight. "I hate you," she yelled. "You're so dead." "Shut up," snapped Jahil. "All you cretins can do is form herds. Enough with you." "You're the one who should shut up," Tyr retorted, throwing the scythe in her hand like a boomerang. It was given to her by an ogre named Kurobe before her departure, and it had so menacing an aura, it likely was at the highest level of legend-class gear, even god-class. In fact, Tyr instinctively knew it was far superior to her own broken blade. It was called the Tyr Scythe, and as Kurobe put it, it reaped tears, not lives, making Tyr think it was the perfect weapon for her. Right now, she needed to put an end to all her sadness. The Tyr Scythe aimed itself at Jahil, as if it had a will of its own. Suddenly Tyr expanded her physical force, confronting Jahil. Diving at his chest, she delivered a powerful punch, then quickly disengaged and caught the scythe as it came spinning back her way. Then, as if nothing had just happened, she took a fighting pose, keeping Kagali protected. It was an amazing feat, made possible by the unique skill manipulator and the control it gave her over her body. Meanwhile, her other unique skill-born optimist only activated under the vague condition of when ordered. Tyr was too weak-willed and flighty for it to work otherwise. But when she received data particles from the heart core of Clayman, she changed. She got stronger, and she decided she had to protect Kagali instead of Laplace, who was gone, and Footman, who had been taken over. At that moment, someone said to Tyr, "If you agree to it, power will be given to you." It was a voice left by someone not present. As she slept, her mind had been analyzed and had this implanted inside, on the reasoning that it had been necessary someday. Its aim was to react to Tyr's desire for power and provide what she wanted. This came at a price, of course, but it was paid in advance. Tyr's power had long since been analyzed and determined to be harmless. Integrating it with Clayman's similarly non-threatening force wouldn't hurt anyone, so it was put in her in the hope that it'd power her up at least a little. "Hey, if someone's giving out something, I'll take it. I gotta get so much stronger." Tyr didn't hesitate to agree to it. The change was completed quietly and swiftly within her mind. Her unique skill-born optimist was combined with the unique skill manipulator, reproduced from Clayman's data particles, and this in turn created the ultimate gift Orpheus, all this, done by the hand of a certain someone. So Tyr was reborn of her own volition. "Okay. Yeah, I know, Clayman. We both have to protect Lady Kagali." She made that promise, and then her power surged, like her late friend was lending her his strength. Her EP of 240,000, which felt like too much for her body to hold, now seemed so small. Being able to double your force from one moment to the next, after all, made a superior opponent like Jahil seem a lot less intimidating. And Jahil was less than thrilled by it. "Don't you dare mock me, you puppet." Enraged, he shot out a large fireball. Sylvia, with her godlike speed, could have avoided it, but Kagali and Tyr had no way to do so. That one shot was going to extinguish their very souls, or it should have. But the duo flickered out of sight, and then they reappeared a short distance away. Even Jahil was startled. "What? You didn't have that kind of power. What have you been doing?" He launched another fireball, this time much more careful about what he was doing. Zorario could have easily seen through the trick, it was childishly simple. Benimaru was just protecting them with his shimmering haze. Jahil had been humbled against Benimaru many times, and after that second try, he figured out what was happening. Stupid little tricks. Enraged anew, he let his temper get the best of him and shot a series of fireballs at his foes. Benimaru used his same trick on those, too. He wasn't directly fighting Jahil, but he had deciphered all his thought and behavioral patterns and given Kagali the best advice he could about them. And so, Ah, you're open. Sylvia's spear pierced Jahil. It wouldn't be enough to kill him, but it did relieve her frustration a little. Cagali, too, was ready. Melchizedek, Lord of Dominion, the ultimate gift granted to her by Michael, had been lost after Yuki took it. She gained her freedom in return, and in Melchizedek's place, she had been powering up Schema, the unique skill that had taken root in her soul. It was very close to the level of an ultimate skill, but no matter how talented Cagali was, there was a limit to how far the non-divine could go. Being able to tinker with one's own skills was highly unusual for anyone but Seal. Cagali knew that because she had experienced it in a dream. Dot. Dot. The voice was clear. If you agree to it, power will be given to you. The offer made little sense, but it had still been made to her sleeping self. Needless to say, it was Seal talking. Within the labyrinth, Seal could do pretty much anything. This wasn't a dream, exactly, so much as a conversation in Cagali's subconscious. Seal proposed a contract to her. In exchange for optimizing Cagali's skills, it would prevent her from turning that power against Rimuru. Even if she betrayed him, though, the power would still be in Seal's hands, so to Seal, it was a two-birds-with-one-stone proposal. It'd get to pursue its hobby of skill tinkering, and it'd help keep Cagali in check, too. In a way, it was the sort of offer only Seal could propose. Cagali, who had been craving power, agreed, thinking it was a dream. She never suspected she was being deceived. It wasn't the sort of blunder the cautious Cagali usually made, but it wouldn't affect her as long as she didn't try taking on Rimuru. That, to her, was no problem. She had lots of reasons to avoid antagonizing him. Dot. Dot. Then when she woke up, she realized the power existed within her. Now that she fully understood it, she fully owned it as well. "Give me back my footman," she shouted, activating her skill, the ultimate gift Agastya. The skill could predict Jahil's movements, as if it could see the future, and she used it to execute this combo attack flawlessly, fully bridging the difference in power. And a true combo it was: Benimaru's judgment, Cagali's predictive skill, Sylvia's actions, and Tyr's resolve. Not even Jahil's evil power could so easily diminish that kind of teamwork. Besides, Benimaru had fought Jahil before. The power difference unnerved him the first time, but now he had a grasp of his strength. There was nothing left to fear. Rimaru's policy was to not fight a battle that couldn't be won, and Benimaru had inherited that drive. In other words, if Benimaru bothered to come, they had every chance to win. All the forces they wanted were in place, and the moment of victory was just around the corner. "Don't give me that," shouted Jahil, unaware of this. "Have you forgotten how terrifying I can be?" He aimed a volley of fireballs at Cagali, then hid himself amid the explosions. Then, using the blasts to propel himself forward, he approached Cagali. He wanted to kill her first. It was an ironclad rule that you started by targeting the weakest, so Jahil wasn't mistaken to do this. But as easy as it was to read his mind, it was even easier to lie in wait for him. Everyone had their own thoughts about this. "No way," Sylvia told herself. "I've never had an easier fight than this." "I knew this coming in," thought Cagali, "but Rimuru wasn't the only threat after all. He puts my mind at ease as an ally, but if I was fighting him, I'd be horrified. I feel totally secure here," thought Tyr, despite having the most dangerous role in this fight. That was how outstanding Benimaru's command was. He did occasionally grumble to Rimuru about it, but as a person in a high position, he always had a real sense of responsibility. Diablo was the same way. Both of them worked harder and achieved more when Rimuru wasn't watching them. Now Benimaru was honing his focus. He was connected to everyone below him via thought communication. Regulate thought, one of the features of his ultimate skill Amaterasu, allowed him to make everyone act like they were all of one will. Thanks to that, they were able to fight evenly with Jahil, despite being far inferior to him. If Benimaru were alone, it would have been impossible to secure this win. He and Jahil fought the same way, which would have made him too indecisive. Any plan he'd attempted would have been foiled. Here in Thalion, like everywhere else, the objective of the game was not to lose. But this fight was different. They had a decisive leader in Sylvia, a safety device in Cagali, and some perfect follow-up work from Tyr. The way Benimaru saw it, they couldn't possibly lose. Zorario gave Jahil a sideways glance, only to be a little surprised. He should have been superior to him in strength alone, but Jahil was being overwhelmed by a party of lower-ranked opponents. Jahil's no fool. He's arrogant, but he's not dumb enough to be defeated out of sheer carelessness. So that man up there is superior to him? He glanced at Benimaru, immediately understanding. He wasn't directly involved in the battle, but he didn't hesitate to provide support at key points. Benimaru's power was in the same vein as Jahil's, and he was neutralizing his flame attacks with relative ease. The flame attribute was immensely powerful when focused on a specific target, but if deflected, it became less and less thermally efficient. The same was true with Jahil, who used his skill-enhanced dominance to gather magicules and launch flames burning at ultra-high temperatures. If that intense wave of heat was turned in a different direction, that'd naturally affect its focal temperature. Doing that couldn't have been easy, but Benimaru had the most nonchalant face as he kept it up. Zorario was honestly impressed. Enemy or not, that deserved praise. Still, Jahil's energy level was so much greater than Benimaru's that not even he could take a direct hit. No matter how much better Benimaru's magicule wrangling skills were, being hit with pure, uncontrollable energy would still be the end for him. He's doing well to prevent that from happening. But I wonder if Jahil will grow tired of this. Zorario thought so. Jahil was a great magician known as the Sorceress Dynast. If he understood the situation correctly, he'd see Benimaru had to be addressed or he'd just grow weaker. It's brilliant, though. Zorario couldn't be blamed for thinking so. Benimaru was skilled at inducing the fireballs away from them. The explosions and impacts from them were awe-inspiring. At first glance, they probably looked overwhelming, which was why Jahil was slow to realize what was going on. The coordination between Cagali and her party was immaculate. Every member was carefully handling their role, and Benimaru seemed to be directing them all. He was a warrior in his own right, but if anything, he showed greater talent as a commander. Secretly, Zorario realized how much of a threat Benimaru was. Taking me on, yet looking in the other direction? How offensive. Leon made the casual observation after their swords crossed at blinding speed. He did not seem particularly angry, he was just saying what he thought. Zorario chuckled. No, not that. We're equal in skill, so whoever loses their train of thought first loses. He breezily parried Leon's blade as he spoke. But he wasn't lying. The higher the level of both swordsmen in a fight, the harder it became for one to truly outclass the other. The trajectory of a sword can be predicted from things like the opponent's line of sight, their body position, and what they're focusing on. In a situation like this one, victory and defeat depended on how well a person succeeded in their feints. To Zorario, keeping an opponent pinned down via conversation was preferable to forcing some action and getting hurt. His enemy wasn't only Leon, Ci, but troublesome ambusher, was there, too. He had a knack for attacking Zorario right when it'd annoy him the most. Lower ranked or not, Zorario couldn't let his guard down around him. One's existence point score, a calculation based on the elements of your body structure, the amount of energy, your resistances, and many other factors, was still, after all, only a rough estimate. If two mismatched fighters were brought together, the match could turn out to be a toss-up, just like how Jahil, a powerhouse, just couldn't keep up with a speed specialist. Zorario was well aware of this. He had a rough idea of his opponent's strength. He didn't have exact EP counts, but years of experience as a warrior taught him that if he judged everything on EP alone, he'd be caught flat-footed. Seeing that, he knew laughing off his opponent was out of the question. He never let his guard down, even when dealing with Leon and Ci at the same time. Leon, too, quickly read Zorario. He's a tricky opponent, Leon thought, ignoring his own foibles. It's hard to deal with someone who never leaves himself open like that. If the enemy was careless, he could use his special attack, but that was unlikely to happen with Zorario. No matter how good at stick and move tactics Leon was, any special move he broke out would leave him open. If he tried to avoid that, then it'd probably mean a marathon battle, no matter what he wished for. Being inferior in every way was proving to be a disadvantage. Leon, competitive based only on his skills, could see defeat in his future if he kept up this approach. In other words, Zorario had the right idea. After reading each other this much, the two of them reacted in starkly different ways. Zorario was calm and collected, while Leon was gradually losing his composure, but Leon wasn't alone. Calm down. Don't be deceived by the enemy's words. Ci, creeping out of the shadows, whispered in Leon's ear. Then he launched a seemingly reckless suicide attack on Zorario, only to be cut down with a single swipe. It was Ci's replication, of course, but this mix of real and fake attacks was actually working out pretty well for the two of them. Leon was the main attacker, but Ci took over whenever fatigue got the best of him. This cycle let them continue the fight with as little wear and tear as possible. For Zorario, too, it wasn't what he wanted to see. But as the stalemate continued, suddenly a change occurred. Benimaru was on the move. Emperor Elmesia, if I could have a word. He was talking to Elmesia, who was taking a break to address her fatigue. Zorario found himself listening in, impressed that Benimaru had the time for this during combat. What is it? She asked. Those knights over there, the Magus, right? Would you mind if I temporarily took command of them? What a crazy thing to ask. Zorario found himself drawn further into this chat, much to Leon's annoyance. He felt like he was being ignored, but then, Leon was just as interested in what Benimaru had to say. What? That's, asking a lot. I know it is. But I've received a report that Milim will be arriving soon. If we don't do something, it'll cause immeasurable damage. I've been ordered to do something to stop this. Is that from Rimuru? Yeah. Elmesia gave him an if I have to look. Normally I'd never allow this, you know. No matter how friendly our countries are. But if Rimuru says so, then fine. Then she called her knight captains over, grumbling about how the apple never fell far from the tree with Rimuru and his officers. Zorario found it just as absurd. Isn't that insane? He said to Leon. Well, it's Rimuru we're talking about. Is he always that weird? Well, frankly, he's impossible to read. For some reason, Zorario felt sympathy for Leon, enemy or not. But still, he thought, what's this Benimaru guy trying to do while fighting Jahil the whole time? Watching with interest, he noticed the knight captain seemed to be complaining about it, too. It was a perfectly natural reaction, but Elmesia raised her voice to silence them. A critical moment seemed to be near, and Benimaru was taking further action. A video image was projected into the air, a view of a faraway place, presumably powered by his skill. What's that? Zorario asked. Some kind of mirage or an applied version of one, said Ci. I guess Benimaru's been making some upgrades to the Argos surveillance magic developed by Sir Rimuru. Ci was kind enough to explain this to Zorario, all the while the battle was ongoing. Swords were still clashing against each other, but it had turned into a kind of rote exercise, giving the participants time to converse. Zorario's swordsmanship was akin to a blunt weapon, cutting down his enemies with a single stroke. The insectors, Zorario's nemesis, were usually covered in exoskeletons that caused damage to his blade after repeated slashes. To prevent this, he instead refined his skills, finding gaps in his opponent and capitalizing on them. Time ran differently between Zorario's home world and this key world, so by local standards, he had been constantly fighting for tens of billions of years. His swordsmanship was at a standstill, however, because it was far too geared toward the characteristics of his main enemy, the insectors. Still, quite a few of them were unusually good fighters, so Zerario's strength had reached an unimaginable level nonetheless. Leon's party could take him on only because Zerario wasn't particularly interested in fighting. The moment they confronted him, Leon and Ci realized just what Zerario's true strength was, but nobody was in a hurry, chatting with each other and providing commentary on events around them. It took a lot of guts to keep that going. This projected image showed what was happening with Rimuru. He was facing off against Milim, while Guy was sparring with Velzard. Vielgrind was there, too, for some reason, working with Rimuru to prevent any damage to the surrounding area. "Look at Vielgrind, cooperating with him," remarked Leon. "Rimuru is certainly a talented conman." "Call him naturally charismatic," said Ci. Leon and Ci were still chatting away, but Zerario had bigger fish to fry. He couldn't understand why Milim and Velzard were heading this way. He wasn't even sure if this was part of the plan. Was Feldway up to something, or was this just a coincidence? It might be that Velzard was acting on her own, but if so, what would she want to accomplish? But if this was a ploy by Feldway? If Feldway gave Velzard some story that incited her, that would explain this. But what's his ultimate goal? Zerario thought it over. Velzard and Milim were in a fight, which was really more about keeping Milim in check than anything. If Velzard decided to pursue some other goal instead, she'd leave at once. Then Milim would cause widespread carnage, and it was highly likely that Guy would move to stop her. That was likely what Velzard wanted to see. If Guy took on Milim, he'd need to devote his whole attention to the fight, and then she would take advantage to make Guy her personal slave, with him doing whatever she wanted him to. That much was easy enough to read, so Guy probably wasn't going to just walk up to her. He'd naturally bring along some assistance, and if that assistance was the demon lord Rimuru, well, it all made sense. But what about after that? It's obvious Velzard's target is Guy. But why bother moving anywhere else right now? Maybe Feldway's involved with this after all. Zerario worked it out up to that point. But the rest puzzled him. Why would they go to the trouble of coming to Thalion, which was already under attack? To support Zerario and his allies? No, I doubt it. What are you thinking, Feldway? Zerario couldn't find an answer. His frustration with Feldway grew. Really, if he'd just explained his plan to everyone at the start, everything would be fine. Instead, they were all stuck there, forced to decipher Feldway's intentions. If they couldn't figure out why he was leading Milim there, they might get caught in the crossfire, with no idea whether to help her out or flee. Zerario thought some more. If Sylvia and Elmesia were Thalion's only defense, his army could easily take this city down by themselves. With the reinforcements the demon lord Rimuru sent out, it was a stalemate, more or less. Was Milim sent over because he'd anticipated this would happen? It seemed like a weak reason. If that were the case, he would have sent Milim here first, and then Zerario's army could have launched a fuller-scale invasion. Having Milim show up when things were already this chaotic made no tactical sense. Or maybe, with everyone occupied like this, nobody could stop Milim from. Zerario looked behind him. There was the sacred tree, standing in this land since time immemorial. Rooted deep in the earth, it protected the planet from all kinds of natural disasters, and it was still standing strong, even after taking all of Jahil's flames. It is the same tree that kept the past Milim/Guy battle from being any more damaging. To the north, there was Velzard. The human realms there were ruled by the demon lord Luminous and protected by Guy and Ramirez. The Nazca region, once guarded by Ludora, was also safe, thanks to Vielgrind's help. But the holy land of Damargania, at the center of all the damage, still bore the scars of the devastation. Skyspire Tower had kept it from completely falling, but all its former glory had been lost. But if you looked at it another way, that was the only damage that resulted last time. This world was protected by gods who put up many obstacles to destroying it. Guy, the great arbitrator, was the best example, feared by mankind as the strongest and most terrifying of demon lords, but still constantly protecting this world, as per his pact with Veldainava. Several beings helped him with this role. There were the demon lords selected by Guy, including Ramirez, the other arbitrator. There were the heroes, their nemesis and counterparts, and now there was Masayuki, the reincarnation of the most powerful hero there ever was. Veilgrind was with him, too. Apart from these, there were relics like Skyspire Tower, influenced directly by the hand of these gods, which also offered the people their protection. The sacred tree was another such relic. Feldway wanted to revive Veldenava, but he failed after losing Michael. If so, what he'll want next is... Zorario felt a chill run down his spine. Maybe he would want to destroy this world. There were only 2 holy relics left in this world, the sacred tree and Skyspire Tower. There was also the labyrinth created by Ramirez, but that should be considered its own separate category. What's more, only a few gods were still around to get in the way. Guy, Rimuru, Chronoa, Masayuki, Veilgrind, and Veldora, to be exact, but most of them were non-factors. Guy was being blocked by Velzad. Rimuru had his hands full dealing with Milim's madness. Chronoa and Masayuki were free, but had probably exhausted their power and wouldn't be around for a while. Veilgrind was devoting too much of her force to protecting the planet to be able to fight. And Veldora was hiding out in the labyrinth. He must have been holing up in there after sensing Feldway was after him, which meant he wasn't likely to leave there anytime soon. In other words, if Zorario had Feldway's goal right, the situation was steadily improving for him. Not good. To be honest, Zorario had no inner urge to destroy. If Feldway was going to die, Zorario really wished he'd die alone. No matter how much of a friend he was, he didn't want to help him destroy the world. In fact, given their friendship, Zorario felt he needed to stop him from doing anything that foolish. I don't know if I'm right or not, but I better assume so now, and act on that. If he was wrong, then it was Feldway's own damn fault for not making himself clear. With that conclusion in mind, he tried to switch his thoughts to what his future course of action should be. Then, looking around, he noticed Benimaru was standing tall, leading the Magus somewhere or another. It impressed him. He's carrying out his strategy against Jahil while simultaneously preparing for the disaster to come? Amazing. He made Jahil look small in comparison, and for Zorario, who disliked Jahil, that made Benimaru look all the better. It's settled, he thought as he spoke up to Leon and the others. I think you know this, but my freedom's been taken from me. I've taken back enough control to be able to say what I think, but Michael is still ruling over me. What are you getting at? I think you'd understand, wouldn't you, if you've been through the same thing? Humph. You want me to help free you? I'm glad you're quick to understand, Zorario casually stated, and then he made a proposal. Benimaru had taken control of the Magus. Elmesia had granted her permission, but the knights were having none of it. How could they? Why was someone from some other country going to command them? Benimaru could understand their reluctance, but now was not the time for it. Elmesia granted him command because she knew that as well, and even Archduke Errol showed his willingness to comply, despite his qualms. The knights in the group were all titled super elites, but they had to obey or there'd be trouble. Any half-hearted attempt at defending themselves, and they'd be exposed to Milim's fury and destroyed in an instant. Milim's just as much of a juggernaut as I thought. She's already changed the topography of the Kusha Mountains, and will suffer the same kind of carnage here if something isn't done. I have to do whatever I can to prevent that. Benimaru was determined. Rimaru's orders were simple: predict their trajectory and figure out a way to alter it. If their course continued as it was, they'd smash right into the sacred tree that protected the capital of Thalion. Rimaru didn't sound too confident about that idea, but Benimaru knew he was never wrong about this sort of thing. In the worst-case scenario, Benimaru was told to evacuate everyone from the city, but first, he wanted to give this the best try he could. The key to this was Magus. As Rimaru said, if they could attack Milim with the combined power of all their knights, they might be able to distract her, even if only for a moment. They weren't even at the stage where they could discuss how to beat her, so there was no need to worry about her getting injured. Like that'd be a worry for anyone. Benimaru chuckled. Then, bracing himself, he raised his voice at the Knight's Herald was still trying to persuade. Listen to me. If things continue as they are, this land will face an unprecedented crisis. A crisis I have been ordered by my lord, Sir Rimuru, to prevent. You may not have a duty to go along with me, but you must obey me for now, or else your homeland will be cleanly wiped off the surface of this planet. Benimaru didn't mean it as a threat. He was simply telling the truth. If they failed to follow Rimuru's instructions, Thalion would almost certainly be destroyed. Of course, even if the Magus didn't follow his orders, Benimaru himself had no intention of giving up. He would do his utmost to help guide the life-saving evacuation, and then he was going to join Rimuru. Jahil was no longer anything more than an inert obstacle in his mind. Kagali, Tyr, and Sylvia alone would be enough to defeat him. That was thanks to Benimaru's support, but to him, that was roughly the same difficulty level as taking out the trash. Regardless, Benimaru wanted to be prepared for the looming threat. All he could do, though, was wait for a response. His strategy would depend on whether the Magus went with him or not, but in order to get everyone on the same page as quickly as possible, he used his skills to project an image in the air. As Sia explained to Zorario, Benimaru replayed the video coming from many miles away with Amaterasu, Lord of Shimmering Flame, his own skill. Based on the science behind mirages, it proved extremely useful for outdoor operations. Using it to show what Milim was up to would make for a more persuasive argument. That was Benimaru's thought, but the results turned out more terrifying than expected. A mere roar from Milim was enough to destroy the natural landscape. Rivers dried up, mountains crumbled. Rimuru was trying desperately to calm her down, but to no avail. He and Veilgrind worked together to serve as punching bags for Milim, preventing any more damage than necessary, but they couldn't do anything else. Or, really, the damage is kept to that level only because Sir Rimuru is distracting Lady Milim? Rimuru was taking up all of Milim's attention, and Veilgrind was blocking out the aftershocks. No wonder Rimuru was so engrossed in this. Benimaru wondered if Rimuru could more actively guide Milim away from danger, but that was impossible. Milim's attacks were like a torrential downpour. Rimuru might have been able to weather it, but he couldn't change the way the rain was going. Or is there some other reason for this? Is he just trying not to make us worry? In any case, Benimaru had a mission to carry out. If I can divert her attention just for a moment, I might be able to change her course. I'll give it a shot. Benimaru took a deep breath. If he failed, it'd be a disaster, the end of the world, even. He didn't like his chances, but it was the only way to win. So he decided to trust Rimuru, as he always did. Benimaru was fine with that, but the Magus force wasn't. It'd be impossible not to be deeply disturbed by the situation. All eyes were on Benimaru, standing tall and proud, and after the Magus quieted down, Elmesia opened her mouth. Like I said, I entrust Sir Benimaru with the command of the Magus. Does anyone object to this? The question, asked with as much authority as Elmesia could muster, was met with silence. Like anyone could say no to her. I don't think anyone's stupid enough to voice any complaints after being shown that. If Elmesia had forcibly given her orders, they all would still have risked their lives following Benimaru, but some of them wouldn't have known what they were fighting for, while others might have still had their own personal grievances about it. Benimaru didn't actually think that far ahead, but as it turned out, he had made the best move possible to solve this issue. With no time to lose, Benimaru issued one order after another. These were knights from foreign lands, but he was loud and energetic as he stirred them up. The Magus seemed to find this encouraging, and in an instant Benimaru's reputation was growing rapidly, if unintentionally. The preparations proceeded steadily. As we approached Thalion, I could see a gigantic tree. It was still some distance away, but it was clearly visible. That alone made me understand just how big this sacred tree was, but no matter how massive it was, it'd be no match for Milim's fury. Her overwhelming force instantly convinced me of this. I had seen my fill on the way. The only reason this planet was still safe was because of Veilgrind offering to help. She was worried the planet would be in a state of chaos if things continued as they were, so she came all the way over for me. I supposed Veilgrind wouldn't like it much if this world fell apart, either, so I didn't really need to thank her that much, but then, if it did, she could just do one of her transdimensional leaps, right? Not that I was gonna turn down her help, but she told me she'd left a separate body by Masaiki's side, so the Veilgrind I saw contained just 70% of her power. Even so, it was helping me enough, and I was relying hard on it. I suppose that's why I dared to ask Veilgrind. Hey, not to get too greedy, but is there any way you might be able to keep that sacred tree from getting damaged? The results were about what I figured. You're as silly as ever, aren't you? Milim isn't even trying, but I'm working my hardest keeping a star barrier going, you realize. And even then, she's still causing tons of damage. She can work directly with stellar particles, you know. And there's no such thing in this world as a barrier that can absorb a Drago Nova head-on. She gave me a cold look, like this was the most stressful day of her life. Her side-eye glare made my heart accelerate, and I regretted asking the question. But I thought Drago Nova got deflected by that, too. Yes, because Milim wasn't really trying. I know for a fact stellar particles can't be deflected, so don't get your hopes up. Okay. I guess Milim was always in full control of her powers, whether she was going easy or not. It made sense that she wouldn't go 100% all the time. She couldn't go destroying the planet while she annihilated an enemy army, after all. Right then, though, she really was out of control. Asking her for mercy would be a big mistake. Somehow or other, we had to remove the orders placed in Milim's mind before she broke out Drago Nova. So what would we do? Seal's plan was to gather all possible forces and launch attacks in waves to attract Milim's attention. In the meantime, I'd find a way to neutralize Feldway's authority over her and cancel out his orders. In fact, Milim was being controlled by Feldway's power, but it wasn't perfect. Seal was pretty confident I could take this thrall off her, or, really, Seal would. But for this to work, we apparently needed to distract Milim in some way first, which I couldn't accomplish on my own. I was thinking Veilgrind could tackle Milim and I could remove the orders when I saw an opening, but apparently the shock waves from that could cause a huge catastrophe on the ground. I should have known. Veilgrind wouldn't have come of her own volition if this weren't a serious crisis. No, as much as possible, I wanted to be the target so we could keep collateral damage to a minimum, but it wasn't working out that way, and there was no way to tell how much damage all this would cause. This whole operation was beyond reckless, really. All that, and the odds of success were so incredibly low. Good news. I have discovered an element that may increase the probability of success. Oh? Well, I hate bad news, but good news is always welcome. Let's hear it. I have confirmed the presence of the Demon Lord Leon and the enemy General Zerario in the vicinity of our destination. This is very convenient for us, so I'd like to ask them to provide some help. Can you give me your permission? Sure, of course, but will they really help out? I know Leon would, but Zerario's kind of on Feldway's side. Not a problem. I'm sure he'd be glad to cooperate with us. I wasn't sure where that confidence was coming from, but in times like these, I could always trust it. Without another thought, I gave my permission. And it wasn't long before I found out what resulted. Zerario's proposal was to have Leon and Ci attack him with all their might, putting him on the spot. He wanted to find out how the ultimate dominion Feldway put on him worked while exercising his own powers with all his might. Leon had been under the control of that as well, but now seemed to be released from it. Zerario wasn't too sure how it'd work with him, but through this experiment, he hoped he'd have a chance to escape from this situation. Leon was up for it. And for him, the override circuit installed in his angelic skill by the Demon Lord Raimoru had been sealed off. This wouldn't help too much with freeing Zerario, but it was worth seeing whether stressing his will as much as possible could do the trick. So they went right down to business, but then they heard a strange voice. I have heard your story. If it is your wish, I will remake your angelic skills to ensure no external force can affect them. This proposal, coming without warning from an unknown person. It was absurd, actually. There was no way you could say yes to something so iffy. Leon and Zorario exchanged looks. Both of them knew this wasn't something either of them had conjured up. They weren't sure what to do, but Leon, at least, was convinced this was Rimuru at work. It seemed silly to think there was any other way. If it was him, there's nothing strange about this at all. Perhaps I should leave it in his hands? Leon's mind was made up. If Rimuru could mess around with the override circuits in other people's skills, anything was possible. This voice almost sounded like him bragging about his insane powers. He wasn't even trying to hide them now. Leon, along with the other demon lords, unanimously agreed Rimuru was a wacko. Rimuru would call that a gross misunderstanding, but he deserved it, really. The moment he let Seal do whatever it wanted, he became a willing accomplice. Zorario, on the other hand, was bewildered. On the surface, he retained the calm demeanor of a battle-hardened warrior, but inside, he was anything but calm. How did you do that? How can you speak directly to my mind? It was the first time he'd experienced anything like this. Leon seemed unfazed, but even that was enough to unnerve the overly serious Zorario. If Leon had done this, Zorario would have perceived it as him jamming his thoughts into his mind, but Rimuru wasn't even there. Common sense dictated this was impossible. And that wasn't all. Zorario, of course, had put up a psychological barrier to prevent any kind of mental attack on him. He was a spiritual life form to begin with, so his heart core was extremely well defended. And besides, how could someone tamper with someone else's ultimate skill, one so intertwined with the owner's hopes? It was beyond nonsensical. I don't understand any of this. Is it even possible? He doubted it. But the voice didn't sound like it was trying to deceive him. Zorario was prepared to put himself in danger to gain his freedom. But this voice was making these incomprehensible proposals, as if nothing could be simpler. It was all so sudden, he almost wanted to laugh. What's the price? If I accept your proposal, what good would it do you? Zorario's questions were understandable, and he immediately had a reply. I would like to ask you for a little help. It's a simple job, really. Just follow my instructions and attack with all your might. This felt beyond fishy. The voice that sounded like Zorario had nothing to lose, which triggered alarm bells. But somehow, the proposal was like a breath of fresh air in his mind. It was strange. All right. I'll accept your proposal. With that, the contract was concluded. Confirming the target's acceptance. I will now perform ability adjust. The change was as dramatic as it was instantaneous. From this point on, the mysterious voice, Seal, held sole authority over their minds. Leon's ultimate skill Metatron was transformed into the upgraded ultimate skill Suya, Lord of Brilliance. Meanwhile, Seal transformed Zorario's Israfel into the new ultimate skill Metis, Lord of Retribution. Seal informed me that all the necessary pawns were in place. I guess Leon and Zorario agreed to help us out. I couldn't believe it. I mean, Leon, sure, but Zorario was our enemy, right? How had it ever come to that? It was very simple. Michael, Lord of Justice, the skill I ran Analyze and Assess on, contained something called Ultimate Dominion that allowed for absolute external control over angelic skills, so I merely made use of that. Oh, right, there was that workaround, wasn't there? Sucked when the enemy was doing it to us, but look at how much it was helping us now. I mean, it was so awesomely powerful, the lack of subsequent fireworks was almost a disappointment. So Seal had opened a channel to Leon and Zorario through their skills and persuaded them to help us. It also tinkered with their skills a bit, it admitted. The sheer devotion Seal had to its hobby might be downright praiseworthy. He. Thank you very much. No, I haven't praised you yet. In fact, I'm more shocked than amazed. But Seal sounded happy, so I kept my mouth shut. Anyway, thanks to this fortunate happenstance, I had more people on my side. Leon and Zerario would maintain the status quo, pretending to fight as they waited for further instructions from Seal. For my part, I contacted every party involved as we prepared for the big moment. I'd keep close contact with Benimaru, making sure there wasn't even the slightest margin of error. It sounded like Benimaru was also assisting against Jahil, but he said not to worry about that. Sylvia was there, as well as Kagali and Tyr, all working together to corner Jahil, and I guess they were beating him, if only because Benimaru, who came from a similar sword style, was telling them how to exploit his weaknesses. I was glad to see that chemistry in action, especially since I didn't think Benimaru alone could have won. I felt fine trusting him at his word, so I turned my mind elsewhere. I explained matters to Ci, telling him to assist Leon and Zerario as needed when the time came. I then sent a thought communication to Ellie, updating her on the situation and telling her to inform the Magus about my plans. I thought Benimaru alone as commander wouldn't be a problem, but this would give me even more peace of mind. By the way, this was the first time I saw the Magus in person, and it was pretty mind-blowing. They reminded me of big, armored robots like you see in anime. They were putting it on, kind of, instead of operating it, so the pilot could sense everything their mech did, but each Magus was a good 16 or so feet high. I really wanted to do some research on these once things were at peace again. It was something to look forward to, I thought, and another reason why this mission had to work. If we failed, Thalion would be reduced to ashes. Focusing once more, I continued my observation of Milim. She was still glowing off a tremendously powerful aura, showing no sign of fatigue whatsoever. I still had no idea how far her powers could take her, but what truly frightened me was how that aura seemed to be strengthening over time. Even then, Milim's was actually growing, or to be precise, the power she had suppressed was finally being released. There was no real point converting this to EP, but hers would definitely surpass Michael's. I had beaten that guy, but still, I shuddered to think about fighting her head-on. But I'd have to. The decisive battle was drawing near, and I needed to think about every possible situation to come so I wouldn't be stuck later on. Zerario couldn't hide his consternation. He had no sense of what had happened to him, even though he had just experienced it. He thought he heard a voice talking about performing the ability adjust or something, and immediately afterward, he could hear the chains binding his heart core shatter inside him. It was only a mental image, but Zerario was sure he'd felt it. After he inherited Michael, Lord of Justice, Feldway immediately had full control over Zerario, and in an instant, all that was gone. He no longer had Israfil, Lord of Trials, the ultimate skill he had managed to obtain, but it was better to toss that aside than to be under someone else's rule forever. That was what he thought at first, but then he realized that skill was still there, and it had become even more useful to him. This ultimate skill was something of a low-level version of Uriel, Lord of Vows. It had some missing parts by comparison, although it compensated for them in other ways, but regardless, the skill worked in much the same manner. Its specialty was managing spaces, making Zerario capable of exerting control over any kind of matter, flow, or wavelength within its effective area. The only exceptions were special cases like data or stellar particles. In other words, not even disintegration, the skill Leon was so good at, would work on him now. Leon could make it work if he had the same kind of energy stores as Zerario, but the real-life difference was too great. If Zerario tried hard enough, he could even reflect Leon's disintegration back at him. That being said, Leon wasn't using any of his special skills in this fight. He hesitated to tap into them, thanks to some doubts he had. That was fortunate for him, and for Zerario, too, although it made for a less climactic show. Thanks to Seal, Zerario's skill had been reborn, the ultimate skill Metis, Lord of Retribution, the ability to manipulate any and all materials and wavelengths in a given space, was a truly insane power, even transcending Uriel. It didn't work on data or stellar particles, but it was still one of the most powerful combat-oriented skills in existence. Zerario could intuitively sense all this. I can't believe it. Why? I accepted the proposal, yes, but I didn't say I would be that voice's ally, or no, actually, before that. He understood he was panicking a little. Who could blame him? Ultimate skills are normally incredibly difficult to acquire. Zorario had lived for tens of billions of years, and only recently did he finally nab one for himself. He knew they existed, of course, but thought he didn't need any. Maybe that was why he never got one, but either way. I know for a fact they're hard to acquire, and now I just get one out of nowhere? Is that even possible? And who could even do that? Zorario shuddered. The ultimate skill system was invented by Veldenava the creator as tools to manage the world with. Other administrative skills could replace them, but a specialized, useful power like Zorario's brand new Metis was truly a divine force. He could even raise the dead with it if he used it right. But is it really possible to just modify ultimate skills like that? These forces that could destroy the very laws of the world? The thought made him shiver. Even contemplating these heady topics was such a strange sensation. Who in the world could have done this? Zorario muttered despite himself. It was Rimuru, Leon replied. Rimuru? You're saying the demon lord Rimuru did that? Yes. You don't have to think too hard about it. Just accept it as the way things are. That's insane, thought Zorario. But looking at Leon, staring into the distance, he could tell Rimuru had put this demon lord through a lot. You're being disrespectful to Sir Rimuru, a miffed-looking CI chided. Wait a minute, replied Zorario. Don't you see how crazy your master is? That's right, Leon said, nodding. The unexpected affirmation made everyone fall into an awkward silence. Zorario attempted to change the topic. And you got one, too? Are you sure of that? Don't be silly. I can feel it. Leon was now in possession of Suya, Lord of Brilliance. It slotted perfectly into his body, like he'd had it the whole time, and Leon could interact with spirit particles without any issue. In terms of pure technique, Leon's ultimate skill was above Zorario's. The former was an experienced warrior, but his enemies were the uniform, never-changing insectors, so honing his skills was never a concept for him. The same was true of Obila. She had been fighting the same enemies for so long her skills had been optimized to work best on those foes she knew so well. Since her beloved sword had gone god class, she was able to slice right through the exoskeletons of the insectors. Any further refinement of her skills was unnecessary. Along those lines, Leon was a former hero who had fought against all kinds of enemies, albeit over a different time frame from his companions. When it came to overall experience, it wouldn't be strange at all if he actually beat Zorario. That was why, despite Zorario holding back a bit, he could beat him without relying on ultimate skills, even with the wide gap in strength. Are you all right, though? Because I haven't seen you use a skill yet. Leon just smirked at the question. It's fine. Now we can fight each other without any second thoughts, but what do you think? Zorario couldn't help but laugh. Leon was all but saying, how about I test it on you first? We'll have plenty of time for that later, he replied, parrying the question as he turned his attention to the now visible Milim. Looking at my friends waiting in the distance, I confirmed they were all set to go. The Nimaru was so good at setting things up that way. Now we could launch our wave attacks at Milim with minimum of waste. I saw CI, too, standing still in midair, or hovering, I guess. He always looked so weirdly seductive when standing in place. That wasn't going to help him in battle, but I guess he wasn't trying to do that, which made it hard to stop. Anyway, he was flanked by Leon and Zorario. They appeared in good spirits, so I guess Seal was right, they really were helping out. Though I suppose this wasn't Zorario turning traitor so much as Feldway just being too much of a prick to work for. Which I certainly didn't mind if he was on our side now. We'd just have to see how things shook out afterward, but I'd let CI worry about that. Okay, Benimaru, final check. Everything looking good? Absolutely perfect. Sir Leon and Sir Zorario are now under my command. There is no need for any anxiety. I was glad he sounded so confident. This fight, after all, was going to last a single instant. We were approaching at a few dozen times the speed of sound, so if we messed up the first move, it was game over. Milim could undoubtedly break out Drago Nova faster than the blink of an eye. All she had to do was hit the brakes, come to a stop, get in position, and fire. It must have seemed like a long time to everyone watching, but the whole thing would be over and done within around 3 seconds. It'd be impossible to hit Milim in mid-flight, so we could only aim for that one moment when she stopped. At that instant, we'd launch a slate of repeated attacks to lure Milim over, then, while she was distracted, I'd activate Azathoth, God of the Void, and undo the regalia Dominion Feldway placed on her. Leon and Zerario would be supporting me with a barrage of all-out attacks, which I think improved our chances. Once the Magus unleashed their waves of magic, Benimaru, Ci, Leon, and Zerario would each launch their most powerful offensive spells. That'd be enough to make even Milim stop for a bit and defend herself. That was the outline of the plan. And the moment was nearly there. Milim was stopped, about to aim an attack on the sacred tree. The Magus began their assault. A massive beam cannon radiated out from them in a single, unwavering movement, like a beautifully staged performance. I would have been longingly watching them if it weren't for my job. Upon closer observation, I could see the beam was a high-output heat ray akin to nuclear cannon, so they had mech weapons that fired nuclear magic that rapidly? Ellie'd been sitting on some neat stuff over there, huh? We were gonna have a lot to talk about. As expected, though, it didn't work on Milim. Benimaru's precise command focused the rays from the Magus on a single point in the air. The focal temperature must have been millions of degrees, which sounded rough, but Milim just didn't care. In fact, she was totally ignoring it, not even trying to defend herself. That looked like a pretty flashy strike, too. Was there much point to it, in the end? It distracted Milim enough to buy us a small sliver of time. Oh. All right. It was almost pointless, but it did its job after all, huh? Whoa, hey, Milim's sticking her arms out ahead of her. I'm not really sure she was distracted at all. At this rate, I doubted anything we could throw at Milim would work on her. All I could really count on was the magic from Benimaru and the gang. The first to go up was Ci. Thousand Shadow Death. His shadow stretched out, forming 1,000 arms that bound Milim down, but despite all the energy he was pouring into his ultimate gift Tsukuyomi, it didn't stop her for a moment. Insta-kill and its ilk sure weren't gonna work on her, no. We had expected this from the start, but it fizzled, with Milim's attention not diverted in the least, but that wasn't about to faze Ci. In fact, he was going right up to her, attempting to pin her in place. Don't worry. That is a separate body of Ci's. Oh, that sort of thing? That's coming in pretty handy, I see. Ci couldn't stop Milim from moving, but he did obstruct her for a little bit. Then a blast of ultimate destructive light danced around them, completely covering Ci. Be rendered into dust. 100 Breaker. This was Leon's special finisher. Each point of light coming from his hands, large enough to envelop a grown person, was a single bolt of disintegration he could freely move in the air. I couldn't think of a stronger move, really, and it quickly turned Ci's separate body into a fine powder, but Milim didn't move. From the moment she got in position to fire Drago Nova, an invisible barrier manifested around her. It shone with a gleam of stellar particles, perfectly blocking any spiritual particle-based attack. I'm sure it outclassed absolute defense, part of Uriel's tool set. Leon's finishers were so powerful even I'd have a hard time with them, but this one faded away without much apparent effect. But the attack wasn't over yet. Even before we knew the results of Leon's strike, Zerario was making his move. Insanity Hush. Zerario, the very picture of fortitude against all odds, had accepted Benimaru's orders without any back talk, and if he agreed to this, he wasn't about to make a mistake. Enemy or not, he seemed to think it was a soldier's duty to obey his commander, making him a pretty trustworthy guy. Actually, even though he wasn't on our side. Zerario was performing this technique just when Ci launched his attack. I had no way of knowing this, but apparently he had never shown it in public before, not even against Leon and Ci. His sword, tough enough to slice an aluminium exoskeleton in two, could instantly kill with a single swipe, and he was pointing all his murderous intent at Milim. No wonder he had an EP of over 20 million. The pressure from this sword was denser than Ci and Leon's attacks combined, an almost too simple strike, delivered at distressingly high speed. But although it made Milim's barrier shine with dazzling light, that was all it did. Truly unbelievable. Every one of them had power nobody could afford to underestimate, and it meant nothing to Milim. The simultaneous attack from all three of them seemed to have failed, but there was still 1 second of time left before Milim activated Drago Nova. To Benimaru, that was more than enough. A bold smile was on his face, as if to demonstrate just how belligerent he could be. Now for the real show. He didn't say it out loud, but Ci, Leon, and Zeraria all went on the move in response. It was just as we'd planned from the beginning. The Guren sword in Benimaru's hand glowed a stunning shade of red, a fearsome crimson light that could burn away all matter, and that light intermingled with Benimaru's own dark aura, prominence acceleration. It glowed like a black sun, this jet-black darkness with red flames dancing around it. This black and crimson sunlight, backed by vicious, stormy violence, took the shape of an Eastern-style dragon. It swirled in the air, swooping down to engulf Milim like it had a will of its own. Even Milim had no choice but to react. Why? Because Benimaru's prominence acceleration boasted an instantaneous energy that ranked up to the tens of millions. Power was calculated based on the relationship between the output and total amount of energy. An attack could contain a large amount of energy, but if the output was low, the results would be pretty weak. By the same token, large output and low energy wouldn't give you much power, either. In Benimaru's case, output was never a problem. His total amount of energy wasn't paltry at all, but it still wasn't enough to take on Milim. So how could Benimaru unleash such an overpowered move? I lent him the power of my master, huh? I didn't feel anything like that at all. Are you acting on your own again, Seal? I mean, if it helps everyone out, then great, but I wish you could have explained that to me first. It was still in the experimental stages, so I thought I would report back after it was successful. A perfectionist as always, huh? I know it was just a quick little experiment for Seal, but it meant a whole lot more to me. But I could whine about that later. For now, I wanted an explanation of what happened. As Seal stated, my ultimate skill Azathoth, God of the Void, contained something called Void Collapse that was a kind of inexhaustible energy flow. It was hard to work with, though, so Seal was working on ways to take advantage of it. As part of this, it had approached some of my cabinet and conducted some negotiation. I asked it why it couldn't just conduct the experiment itself, and it said, I would never put my master in danger. Okay. I thought it'd be safer if we did this kind of thing in the labyrinth, but Seal wouldn't tolerate that, either. It was being way too overprotective, but I guess I should appreciate how much it cared for my safety. Ah well. Anyway, Seal had devised and built a system to secretly supply the energy from Void Collapse, piping it over to those connected to me via a soul corridor. It was truly Seal in its element, I suppose. It was an application of supply and demand, as it was explained to me, but I'm sure it was the kind of thing only Seal, who had already done stuff like combine Azathoth and Shub-Niggurath, could do. This whole setup wasn't complete yet, apparently, but that void supply was the secret behind that instantaneous surge in Benimaru's power. Prominence acceleration surrounded Milim, chomping at her. She stopped, looking clearly annoyed as she swatted at it. Demon wire bind. Ci's mystical threat caught her. 100 prison, said Leon. A disintegration-powered cage instantly completed itself. The invisible barrier around Milim twinkled like the brightest of stars, but she still hadn't activated Drago Nova, We just bought ourselves enough time. Zorario, by the way, didn't have any kind of capturing techniques like this, so he was just releasing his aura to exert more pressure on her. It was effective enough, I suppose, but I kinda wished he had something for a situation like this, not that I was gonna tell him. Everything was looking pretty ideal. I was ready to go, and I wanted to be sure this went right so everyone else's hard work didn't go to waste. It's up to you, Dr. Seal. Leave it to me. It didn't really feel right to me to rely wholly on my skill when it mattered the most, but since Seal and I were pretty much one and the same, this was me trying my very hardest. With this perfect argument running through my mind, I prepared myself and waited for the results. Reset. It worked with almost no fanfare. Seal understood the power behind Michael, Lord of Justice, how it was able to duplicate and cancel out all other effects. With that, Feldway's Regalia Dominion lost all effectiveness on Milim. The whole operation was a brilliant success. And while I wanted to congratulate everyone on a job well done, Milim was still out of control. We had undone the order in her mind to destroy Thalion's sacred tree, but we still had some tricky work to do. If we kept duking it out there, the shock waves alone would cause massive damage to Thalion. We needed a new location, fast. The Republic of Gracia was nearby, and Leon's domain was across the sea as well. The western nations spread out in the opposite direction, so for a route that'd keep damage to a minimum, our best bet was to guide Milim over the sea and toward the barren lands. It'd affect things in Dagral's domain, but it was a tad too late to worry about that. I didn't want to kill any of the locals, though, so we'd need to evacuate everyone beforehand. This was where CI came in. CI, I'm gonna try to guide Milim to the barren lands, but I wanna make sure none of Dagral's subjects are hurt. Can you do that? I gave him the basic outline. He responded with just the answer I hoped for. I am on the job. I left a separate body behind for just such a purpose, so I can begin moving immediately. A consummate professional, that man. Seriously. He never made a single error. When I planned things, I never thought about what might happen in the future, but with him, I could count on that. Once again, he showed me just how capable a guy he was, so I left all that work to him. That was all a big relief, but then something terrible happened. Time stopped on me. Who the hell didn't get the message? I don't need this right now. I couldn't help but shout that in my mind. Like, if Milim stopped, too, then great, but she was still moving around, of course. Plus, with time stopped, all the world's defenses were at zero, which suddenly made her extremely dangerous. She was tough enough as it stood, but at that point, even touching her was out of the question. Fighting would be a terrible idea, so I had to get her over to the deadly desert. We did a great job distracting her before she started firing off attacks like crazy, but as it stood, CI couldn't evacuate the locals in the desert before I took her over there. Hardly anywhere in this world was totally uninhabited, and either way, it wouldn't be very nice of me to go destroying whole ecosystems. Over here, Milim, I shouted to get her attention, and then I started moving. This was an extremely unpleasant turn of events, but I was in a mid-air dogfight with Milim in this suspended world. If I hadn't figured out how to deal with stop time, it would have been all over at this point. I was glad about that, but still, it was tough to fight Milim like this. I could feel my strength being drained, but Milim's was seemingly infinite. It was still rising. A first-grade math education was all you needed to know who would run out first. As it stood, I was doomed. The world was about to collapse, and I didn't really want that to happen, but I didn't even know who stopped time in the first place. I knew I could cross Chloe off the list. It could be Guy or Velzard, but they could move in this space, too, so I didn't see much of a motive for them. Who could have pulled this crap on me? Feldway? It'd be a good way of harassing me, yeah, but would he really do that at this point? Now really wasn't the time to be looking for a culprit, but if I wanted to do something about this, I preferred to know who I was dealing with. Then. Rimuru, can you hear me? Veldora talked to me through a thought communication, or To be exact, he was sharing his thought data through our soul corridor. Being in a suspended state like this made nearly all magicule-consuming skills useless, so it was difficult to communicate at all unless you had workarounds like this one. But Veldora hasn't been affected by this, huh? I guess I should have expected that. Yeah, I'm listening. Stop sounding so casual about this, you. Shion and Luminous are in grave danger over here. Adalman's team was having a tough time as it stood, but nobody here can counter Dagrel's time stop, you see, So Dagrel did that? That he did. Dagrel, of all people. He must have wanted to end this in a hurry. Well, there's the culprit, then. And if he was locked in warfare with Shion and the gang, they must have used spatial transport to travel, just as I feared. They must have really pushed Dagrel to the edge for him to use something like this. Stopping time mainly helped weed out the weaklings. If someone couldn't cope with it, that was their problem. I got trapped in this once, too, but I had no idea Dagrel had access to it. So now what? There were two problems here. One, if I didn't help Shion, Luminous, and the rest, they might all be wiped out. Two, the trickier one, how was I gonna get there? Spatial transport involved sending data particles over to perceive the other side, so you couldn't use it while time was suspended. You could probably transport yourself to another point within visible range, but it'd be faster to just move like normal. No matter how far, or close, your destination was, you needed to use data particles to read the situation in your destination first, and if that was the case, I might as well just walk instead. Given this situation, Dagrel would probably wipe out his opponents before I could reach Lubelius to rescue them. Whether I went there or asked Veldora to help out, the results would be the same. And if I was dealing with Milim, Veldora was about all I could turn to. Veldora, whether you make it in time or not, can you go and try to bail them out right now? That's what I was waiting to hear. I really wanted Veldora to remain our final line of defense in the labyrinth, but I couldn't be picky. We just had to work out a transport. Could he maybe tough it out for me? Sir Rimuru, I have connected my thoughts to Ultima. I will send her coordinates over to Sir Veldora immediately. Whoa. Diablo, of all people, had just interrupted us. No matter the distance, spatial transport is possible even in suspended space if you have the right coordinate data. Since Ultima is in the area, I shared in her senses and had her acquire the needed data. Okay? So, that was possible because of our soul corridor connections? Yes, exactly. It sounded pretty confident, but really, traveling that far in stop time? Seems like a cheat code to me. It's totally impossible otherwise, right? People being connected by soul corridors in this space was such an exception to the rule, I didn't even know what to say. Anything was possible, wasn't it? Not too proud to leverage that, though. Whenever you're ready, Ultima. Right. I'm on it, Sir Rimuru. Will these work, Sir Veldora? Yes, well done. Qua ha ha ha, now it's finally my turn. Veldora's laugh was like a breath of fresh air to me. And if Diablo and Ultima could function in suspended time, too, well, I couldn't feel more reassured. And then, just when I felt Veldora make the transport, the world started moving again. I suppose Veldora did his job, just like I knew he would. Breathing a sigh of relief, I got back to my own task, guiding and distracting the crazed Milim as we flew toward the barren lands. Dealing with Kagali's party was starting to seriously rile Jahil. He had thought they were wimps, but he still hadn't been able to land any decisive damage on them, a fact that made him wince with anger. But his thoughts were calm. He was well aware of what was happening around him. This is insane. I can't believe the Dragon Princess had that much power the whole time. No, but more than that. Zerario's betrayal was a real problem. Jahil didn't know how it happened, but Zerario was helping keep Milim captive, a distressing twist. Jahil didn't care about loyalty to Feldway or anything like that. For him, the problem was that he had no other allies left in this region to count on. If it was just Kagali's party, he could probably trounce them in time, but if Zarario was his enemy, too, escape could prove pretty difficult. This isn't what I was promised, Feldway. He shut off an enraged thought communication to blow off some steam. After a short silence, Feldway muttered back at him. You're saying Zarario betrayed us? Stop acting like a doddering old man. I'm in danger, too, if this keeps up. I'm going to retreat, but do you mind that? He was polite enough to ask, but Jahil was already preparing his escape. It was humiliating, considering how inferior his opponents were, but taking that extra caution was how Jahil had survived. Otherwise Milim would have obliterated him long ago. So Jahil held his demigod's blood spear tight, then unleashed a power he never had before. The blood spear had a lot of power, he had forced it to accept him as its master, but its rejection instinct made it dangerous to use too much. It was an ultimate weapon, though, one he could trust in a pinch, and when combined with Jahil's own skills, it could conjure up evil blood waves that could vaporize even the largest of nations. This worked the same in principle as a thermobaric weapon. By scattering magicules across a wide area, then setting them aflame, he could generate an explosion. And he hadn't been fighting at random, either. While keeping Tyr and Sylvia at bay, he was also secretly spreading magicules around. They now filled the battlefield, ready to transform into murderous hellfire at Jahil's will. These guys would likely withstand my evil bloodwave, though. This was a wide-range skill meant for use against whole armies, so it wouldn't be a decisive blow against a strong enough opponent. Anyone below a high-level magic-born, though, could never survive. The magicules Jahil dispersed covered Thalion's Magus core. They'd engulf and burn Zerario's forces to the ground, too, but that was none of Jahil's business. It'd be the perfect distraction to save his own life with, so he wouldn't hesitate to use it. Prepare to see just how great I am, you maggots. Then in a single burst of combustion, Jahil detonated his evil bloodwave. The sacred tree was covered in flames, its outermost layer exploding from the super-high heat. The Magus deployed in all directions to protect the tree were similarly engulfed. Sylvia and Tyr, standing in front of Jahil, and Kagali, a little behind them, were too caught up in the flames to react. Ha 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 ha. Take that and die, you bastards. May you wail in despair in the afterlife, forever trying to stop me. Jahil laughed hysterically as he sneaked away, hiding in the flames. The blazing fire was threatening to consume the very atmosphere itself. But the moment Jahil left the picture. Boy. Good thing he wasn't paying attention. With those words from Benimaru, all the flames were extinguished at once. It looked like it was going to be a catastrophe, but the next thing everyone knew, there was only minor damage. Sylvia, Tyr, and Kagali didn't even suffer any burns. The Magus, who had been in the greatest danger, were all safe. Some of the magic mounts were stuck where they were, damaged by the sudden wave of intense heat, but all their pilots were protected, so there were no serious injuries. The sacred tree, the one thing everyone thought would be a maelstrom of flames, remained fresh looking down to the last twig, although there were scorch marks here and there. The tree wasn't as damaged as it looked, and in a few days, it would likely be good as new. I tell you, it sure was hard manipulating the air so Jahil wouldn't notice, said Elmesia. You've done well, Emperor Elmesia, Benimaru said. You made the perfect decision, just as I expected. Benimaru flashed a hearty smile, consoling the grumbling Elmesia. As may be inferred from this exchange, the minimal damage from evil bloodwave was thanks to Benimaru's behind-the-scenes work. The job he was doing made him a literal jack of all trades, and master of them all, too. While proceeding with his operation to stop Milim, he was assisting Kagali's party with Jahil, and also working with Elmesia to foil Jahil's plot, preventing damage before it occurred. The magicules Jahil's skills spread around were actually a special flammable type of matter called blood mist. Vampires occasionally used this for their spells, but wrangling this matter was one other skill of the demigod's blood spear. Blood mist had a slightly different aroma from natural magicules, which Benimaru recognized through some precise control magic work, making him realize Jahil was up to something. But Benimaru wasn't the only person to spot this. Sylvia immediately sensed the danger, but she had no idea how to deal with it. If she made any untoward moves, she feared Jahil would speed up his spell, causing even more damage. So she asked Benimaru what to do, and since he had noticed it, too, he already had a full grasp of the situation. That alone was impressive, but it didn't bring them any closer to a solution. No, the answer came down from the heavens. You must use Elmesia's ultimate skill Vayu, King of Heavenly Wind, to gather the blood mist alone, then the ultimate skill Amaterasu, Lord of Shimmering Flame, to burn only the demonic blood. Upon hearing this revelation, Benimaru immediately sprang into action, asking no further questions. Some things in the world were better off not being examined too closely. He'd heard that voice back when Rimuru connected that void collapse circuit to him, too, but Benimaru freely accepted what it told him, pretending nothing was amiss. Everything in accordance with Sir Rimuru's will, you could say. If this heavenly voice is working in his favor, I'll just go along with it. So with that resolve, Benimaru stayed busy both in public and behind the curtain. With the help of Elmesia and the others, he made it through another crisis. So Jahil's plan was foiled, thanks to the efforts of Benimaru, Sylvia, and Elmesia. Jahil himself had made good his escape, but given their lack of backup, Benimaru thought it best not to take any more chances. This was really the best outcome possible. Then as soon as everything settled down, Benimaru collapsed. Seeing Jahil was gone made every bone in his body give way at once. Ci, perhaps anticipating this, quickly steadied him. Can't blame him after all he's done for us. Elmesia's eyes were as gentle and respectful as her words as she watched the fainted Benimaru. To her, Benimaru was a national hero who'd saved Thalion from its greatest crisis. She knew how hard he worked for it, and it was only natural for her to react that way. Still, she had a lot of work left to do, mainly dealing with Zorario and his legion, who were all alive and well. The task concerned her. With Jahil gone, there was a lull in the battle, with both sides waiting to see what the other would do. Should she get this battle roaring again? That was the question on her mind. Since Benimaru stepped up to stop Jahil's attack, none of Zorario's forces were damaged. It wasn't quite an even match anymore, they actually had a slight advantage over Thalion's army. Their baseline forces weren't much of a threat, but those two generals were a menace. There was so much to worry about, and what was worse, she wasn't sure if the enemy would even agree to a ceasefire. Elmesia pondered at superspeed, simulating all the possibilities that came to mind. But her worries would soon be over, long before she could work out any answers. Darlis and Nice were in charge of Zorario's army. Their former advisors had been defeated in the previous mad dash for a walking dead body, their egos fully extinguished. The throneless class of angels could be so weak-willed that way. After all that fighting, too, but no, it was actually the opposite. They had performed the same work for untold amounts of time, and it wore out their souls, causing their senses of self to fade. Zorario's presence as a seasoned warrior was perhaps another reason for that. Obila's forces were quite different. With her, camaraderie mattered, and every member of her army adored her. Many of them had died in battle, with Oma her only assistant remaining, but each one was a valiant warrior willing to risk their life for Obila. Zorario, on the other hand, operated his force like a fine-tuned machine, not a single cog out of place. There was no need for self-awareness in this force, all they had to do was follow their orders, and everything would work out fine. Thanks to that, Zorario had few true friends, and now only two, Darlis and Nice, were alive. Zorario approached them. For reasons I cannot surmise, Benimaru protected us as well, noted Darlis. We've temporarily paused fighting subsequently, but should we continue with it? Are you sure about all this, Sir Zorario? Nice asked. I'm afraid Sir Feldway might see this as treason. Darlis was sticking to business here. Nice, out of consideration for Zorario, was implicitly asking about his future plans. It wasn't at all the direction Zorario thought the question would take, but that was why he found these guys so amusing. They're really starting to act like individuals now. Surprising? Zorario hadn't paid attention to it before, but even his assistants were expressing their own opinions now. It gladdened him. "Hair. You guys are way too serious." Darlis and Nice were astonished to see him smiling. It was as momentous an event as the world itself ending. In all their memories, there wasn't a single instance of Zorario smiling. Sir Zorario? Is this some kind of a trick as well? Or are you testing us? Zorario raised a hand. Calm down. I've decided further fighting is pointless. What? He had just formally declared the end of hostilities. It surprised Darlis, but he meekly obeyed the order and transmitted it to the rest of the army, and also, Nice, I did not betray Feldway. Quite the opposite. He took away my free will. He trampled all over the trust we built as friends. There was a quiet anger in his voice. It was his way of saying farewell for good. So will we not see Sir Feldway again? Zorario nodded back at the fearful Nice. That's right. I have decided to part company with him. The statement made Darlis and Nice gasp. Fortunately for you, he continued, neither of you acquired an ultimate skill. You weren't given an ultimate gift, and you still have your own freedom. You may continue to follow me, or you may join Feldway. I will give you a moment to make your choice. This sudden ultimatum confused Darlis and Nice. You don't need us any longer. Did we do something wrong? No, he said, assuaging their panic. I, too, have just been freed from his domination. It's taught me the importance of freedom all over again. You should take a break, too, and look at the beauty of this world. The two angel assistants looked around. The sky was completely clear and beautiful, like no war had been fought there at all. The sacred tree, saved from the threat of Milim, loomed high above them, although the burnt bark stood out here and there. Each branch was long and wide enough to support the heavens themselves, their green, lush foliage spread wide. A pleasant breeze blew across the leaf they were standing on, a breath of fresh air, blowing away the old ways of thinking. After ages of hostility, we now have a truce with the insectors as well. I was doing Feldway's bidding as a favor to a friend, but I can no longer tolerate the way he conducts his life. It's time for me to find a new way to live. Clearly, Zorario didn't want to serve Feldway if he was going to be that unfaithful to him. He might have been a warrior, but he wasn't constantly looking for new challenges on the battlefield. He fought because he had to, not because he found it his calling. He had been forced to fight all his life, but now Zorario wondered if it was time to turn his attention to other things. His assistants agreed with him. Well, actually, ever since I've occupied a Walking Dead, I've been thinking a lot about what matters, too. It feels like someone else's will resides within this body. If I was able to, I think it'd be great if I could find a hobby besides fighting. Darlis sounded hesitant, but he managed to get it all out. That's fine, Zorario replied, nodding. I don't have any particular thoughts, said Nice. I will continue to follow you, Sir Zorario, for as long as I can. Her will was certainly firm. All she wanted was to be of use to Zorario. That, too, is fine. He accepted the offer. He had decided to live his life freely but not irresponsibly. He would never abandon those who loved or followed him. In that case, said Darlis, I will join you, too. Oh? Are you sure? I won't stop you from finding your own pastimes to pursue. He. I'm sure that'd be fun, but I'm not in a hurry. I'll wait until everyone's settled down first. That sounds good, too, Zorario thought. They had a lot of life left to live. There was no harm in taking their time to rethink their future paths. But for that to work, they needed the world to be at peace first. I suppose our next goal is decided, then. The world was so beautiful, and yet Feldway hadn't even tried to look at it. Now he was actively trying to throw it out of order. As a friend, Zorario thought, He couldn't afford to overlook this outrage. Listen to me, all of you. Our enemy is Feldway. Let us put an end to his delusional ambitions and make the world a stable place. Yes, my lord. Zorario's army was still a well-oiled machine. Here, too, the decision was unanimous. At Zorario's command, the entire army disarmed at once. I see no point in further combat, he said. What about you? He had gone up to Elmesia alone. She agreed with him. I'm in the same boat. I don't think this battle was much to your liking, either. Let's call it a draw and put away our weapons. The statement was tantamount to saying she wouldn't demand reparations or apologies from the other side. She could have asked for them, being the politician she was, but instead she proposed a draw in order to force this war to a quick end. The noble families near her were in support of this, not that they had a choice. If the fighting continued, the very future of Thalion was at stake. The Magus had sustained severe damage, but at least their magic mounts were repairable. If the battle continued, though, the casualties would undoubtedly start to grow. You couldn't use money to compensate for the loss of a life, and the nation as a whole would grow weaker. Feldway's chaos was likely to continue going forward, and they couldn't afford to waste resources on things like this. Fortunately, the leaders on both sides were smart enough to see this. None voiced objections about the Emperor's decision, and thanks to these high-end talks, Elmesia and Zorario signed an agreement to end the war. A joint statement was released soon after, and so, for the time being, Zorario would station his army in Thalion to prepare for the unprecedented crisis that likely lay ahead. Feldway, looking down from the heavens, had a full grasp of the entire battlefield. Imagine, Zorario turning away from me. It was a shock to him. Zorario was one of his few confidants and old friends. Losing him was something Feldway never imagined would happen. His grip on sanity was failing him. First he lost Michael, then he was betrayed by Zorario. And only after he lost them did he understand how vital they were. Are you going to abandon me, too? Then there's no more need for hesitation. I must risk my own life to prove the existence of my God. Feldway's mind was twisted and broken, irrevocably, without anyone ever knowing. What are you gonna do, Feldway? Vega asked. At least he had it easy. No responsibilities at all, just pursuing his own purposes and pleasures, day in and day out. Feldway gave him a wry smile. Heh. It's all going to plan. Yeah? But wasn't Milim supposed to take down that big tree? That didn't actually matter much. We can knock it over later. Zorario's departure wasn't at all part of the plan, but it was true this didn't unravel Feldway's plans at all. He was as confident as ever, and the fated time was near. Any slight hesitation that remained in his heart was banished whenever he recalled how Zorario had forsaken him. He was driven by just one purpose. There was no stopping now. Vega, I want you to team up with Dino and go conquer the labyrinth. Oh? Sweet, I'm finally seeing some action. He laughed happily. Mai, standing to the side, came to attention when Feldway looked at her. Vega had never been given a key, so she couldn't leave the Celestial Palace. Mai, on the other hand, had a duplicate, which let her send Vega and the other residents anywhere she pleased via instant motion. Feldway, among others, had a key linking him from his home world to the palace, but only Velzard possessed the key to Skyspire Tower, their link to the surface, the true key, as it was called. Feldway's key was registered with this key world, however, so he could move around as he pleased. May's duplicate key, meanwhile, was built into her ultimate gift, giving her full freedom of travel as well. Dino and the others had been given similar keys, but he wasn't all that happy about it. Huh? Me too? Dino still sounded like he didn't want to lift a finger to help. But his reaction was ignored. Veldora, the greatest asset the labyrinth had, was gone, opening up a perfect opportunity. No matter how much Dino whined, there was no reversing this decision. You can expect good news from me, Vega said as he left. Mai led the way, followed by a despondent Dino, along with Pico and Gasha, rolling their eyes as they dragged him away. Silence fell across the celestial palace. Feldway, alone in there, was contentedly laughing to himself, a laugh tinged with a hint of madness. Then, looking down at the planet's surface, Feldway began working on his final touches. Epilogue. Rimuru vanishes. As I was guiding Milim toward the barren lands, I suddenly had a bad premonition. Something had just occurred to me, and it wasn't too rosy. This stuff I was doing. What if this was exactly what Feldway wanted me to do? It was something I likely picked up on only because I'd been following Seal's suggestions a whole lot lately. Maybe I was overthinking this, but the fact I had only one suitable destination to aim for led to some uncomfortable questions in my mind. If this was him leading me around, he undoubtedly wanted to see me at Skyspire Tower. After all, that was a divine relic from a god so strong it completely blocked Michael's attack. The surrounding deadly desert would also prevent further damage from Milim, a shared goal of ours. I felt bad for Dagrel, but hey, we were enemies. I wasn't gonna lose sleep over it. I mean, I didn't feel great about it, but if he was hostile to me, so be it. Call it an act of God, sort of. So Skyspire Tower was about the only place I could take Milim to. He didn't predict that, too, did he? Nah, I gotta stop worrying about. No way, I really doubted Feldway could outsmart Seal's predictions. We couldn't have ended that battle without Zerario's support, and there was no way he could have predicted that. If he knew Zerario would abandon him, he could have tried any number of other tactics. There was really no point dwelling on this, but I still kind of had a bad feeling. And as if on cue, Ramirez contacted me. I hated how these feelings always panned out. Hey! Rimuru. Big trouble over here. Yeah, same here, I was about to say, but Ramirez kept going before I could. Dino and his crew are attacking us. We're intercepting them, but I'm kinda worried now that my master isn't here. This sucks. If I hadn't asked for Veldora's help, I still would have been suspended in time. Dagrel had true dragon-class power, he could have kept it stopped for a long time to come. If I had allowed the crazed Milim to do whatever she wanted in that state, the sacred tree would be a bunch of burnt-up lumber, and who knew what other trouble she could have caused, so I didn't think I made the wrong call, but... Well, all I can say for now is hang in there. That's really not the kinda answer I was looking for. Oh, I know. But, I gotta devote everything I got to handling Milim, so... I can't make contact with Benimaru at all, either. If you don't come back real soon, it's kind of gonna be a big problem for me. I could tell Ramirez was nervous. She couldn't contact Benimaru because he'd overexerted himself, no doubt. I confirmed his safety earlier, and I figured he'd be back on his feet before long. All right. Just try to hold out for the time being. I know, but seriously, come back soon. After some more grumbling, she finally ended the call. She could have given me at least a little praise, but now was no time for jokes. I had no idea how the fight between Guy and Velzard was going, there was no way anyone could intervene with them. We had invaders in the labyrinth, and the battle was still intensifying. Milim remained beyond control, and I had no idea yet how to stop her. If someone could take on Milim for just a few moments, we'd be able to stop her via Regalia Dominion. I was really averse to that, but in the worst-case scenario, I'd have no choice. More to the point, though, there was no someone here. Simply lifting Feldway's order was a task tough enough to totally drain Benimaru. Asking him to do it all over again would at least have to wait until he recovered. And it really felt like our enemy was seeing all our moves and intelligently responding to each one, didn't it? An attacker was always going to have the advantage, but I didn't think it'd be this one-sided all the time. I'd have loved an opportunity to counterattack, but, as free as I'm sure I sound, thinking about extraneous stuff like this, I really couldn't take my eyes off Milim's onslaught. If I was leading Milim, that meant she was targeting me. There was no way I could do anything about Feldway, and I had my hands full cutting off Millem's attacks as we headed towards Skyspire Tower. Finally, I saw it in the distance. The tower should be able to withstand her attacks. Once I was inside, I was sure things would be a little better. But sadly, that bad premonition I had was about to come true. "I've been waiting, Demon Lord Rimuru." A voice from above reached my ears as I wrestled with Millem. It was the malevolent voice of Feldway as he descended before me. "Damn it. I knew you'd aim for this," I yelled. I cursed my fate, but it was already too late. I was wondering what I should do when Seal chimed in, its voice agitated. "Retreat from the area immediately." Its unusual behavior indicated just how much of an emergency this was. By retreat, Seal was basically telling me to get the hell out of Dodge. I'd have loved to, really, but I couldn't. I was still fighting Millem. This was exactly what Feldway wanted. What a disaster. And I wasn't panicking, either, because I knew exactly what was going to happen. Feldway's next move. "Now, Millem. Obey me once more, Regalia Dominion." Gar, I knew it. He didn't hesitate for a moment to employ the one last resort that bothered me the most. The power drained from Millem, showing me she was once again under Feldway's thrall. I was glad she stopped fighting. Surely all her rage was gonna be pointed at me. Check and mate, I guess. If I had to deal with Millem and Feldway at once, I would have no chance of winning. "Come the hell on. You coward," I shouted. Call it being a sore loser or sour grapes, or whatever you like. I felt I had a right to complain. But Feldway just looked down on me, laughing. "What a sorry sight you are, Demon Lord Rimuru. You're in my way, so now it's time to make you disappear." Actually, maybe he wasn't laughing at me. Maybe it was his way of recognizing my strength. Feldway, after all, was edging away from a confrontation with me. I assumed he was going to team up with Millem to beat my ass, but surprisingly, it didn't happen. Prepare to be blasted to the far edges of time and space. Chronosaltation. I had seen something like this before. It was the same attack that wiped Veilgrind off the face of this planet a short time ago. And then, the moment I had that thought, everything went dark. Thanks to Feldway's dimensional transfer, I was blasted to an unknown location, the past, the future, the present. I had no idea. I was lost.